welcome. Welcome to all of you here in the audience, and welcome to those of you who will be watching this. This is our panel discussion, An Ever Closer Union, Mapping the EU's Federal Fantasies. I'm Ellen Fantini. I'm the managing editor of the European Conservative. And as I said, a very warm welcome to all of you. Over the past few months, Brussels has been full of calls for systemic EU reforms, a treaty overhaul that's presented as inevitable if the EU wants to remain functional with over 30 members once the next enlargement takes place. However, treaty change in the EU has always been a one-way street, giving more power to Brussels and further eroding member states' sovereignty in a relentless march toward an increasingly federalist future. And that's exactly what's happening now, only on a scale vastly larger than any time before. A series of reform proposals were put forward by the European Parliament late last year, outlining the EU mainstream's long-term intentions, while the public is intentionally being kept in the dark. So what do these proposals entail? Among others, they entail scrapping member states' veto power in the European Council so that no individual country can say no to EU policies that might go against their national interests. Transferring several key policy areas under EU competence. These include foreign and defense policy, environmental policies, migration and border control, and even public health.
Yes.
Policies to create transnational constituencies in EU citizenship with voting rights for mobile citizens.
Yeah.
So these proposals are among the most important decisions of the next coming legislative term. That's the 24 to 2029 term, and that's why we're here to discuss them. In our panel, we'll discuss what exactly is being proposed here, what it would mean for the future of Europe, and how it will affect not only nation states, but ordinary citizens and democracy itself. Joining me to discuss this topic are three distinguished members of the European Parliament. Richard Legutko is an MEP from the Polish Law and Justice Party and co-chairman of the European Conservatives and Reformists Group, that's ECR. He's a former Polish education minister and Secretary of State, and Professor Legutko has also had a long and distinguished career in academia, teaching ancient philosophy and political theory. To his right, we have MEP Jacek Saryusz-Wolski, also a member of the European Parliament from the Polish Law and Justice Party. He's a former vice president of the European Parliament, and he was the first Polish European Affairs Minister, architect and negotiator of Poland's EU membership, and the chairman of the European Parliament Foreign Affairs Committee. To his right, we have Herolf Annemans, also a member of the European Parliament and head of the Vlaams Belang delegation within the Identity and Democracy Group. He was co-founder and former chairman of the ID Group's predecessor, the Movement for a Europe of Nations and Freedom. The structure of this panel will be that each of the panelists will give some introductory remarks. I imagine I will use my moderator's privilege to follow up with some questions, and then if there's time, we can open it up to the audience. So, Professor Legutko, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ellen. Good afternoon or morning, whatever it is now. And well, I will make some very, very general remarks, if that's all right with you, about the concept of an ever closer union. So if I were to quote one statement that would capture the essence of what I think is wrong with the European Union, I would indicate a sentence from Article 1 of the Treaty of the European Union, and here's the quote. The treaty marks a new stage in the process of creating an ever closer union among the peoples of Europe, in which decisions are taken as openly as possible and as closely as possible to the citizen, unquote. Now, what's wrong with this sentence, with this statement? Well, there's a contradiction in it. I mean, you cannot have it both ways. You cannot have huge supranational structure and at the same time providing a possibility for the decisions that are as open as possible and as close to the citizen. It's either or. An ever closer union is a process towards big bureaucratic supranational institutions. And this process, the more advanced it is, the more remote these institutions are from the concrete situations, from the citizens and the problems, whatever those problems might be.
Yes.
So if you right at the beginning of the treaty, if you have something like a contradiction, the obvious consequence is that you some have to conceal this contradiction. How do you conceal the contradiction? By making a language that lies, a mendacious language. This is just one of the reasons why the language of the European Union is full of lies. But like calling clearly undemocratic institutions democratic, or restricting the freedom of speech and calling it increasing the freedom of speech. So there are many lies, but this is just I would like to show you that the mechanism is there, right at the very beginning of the text of the treatise. But it is more than that. It is not only a contradiction. In a statement, you see that European Union was conceived as a process towards a certain end. Now, this is extraordinary if you look at it from the political point of view or from the point of view of the constitutional law. The whole point of the Constitution is to make the system as stable and as immovable as possible, to have the clear division lines between the competences of the institutions. Especially in a federal system, there has to be a clear borderline between the competences of the federal government and of the smaller parts of the federation. Now, if you have a system that is conceived as a process, the immediate consequence, of course, is an encouragement. It is an encouragement for the institutions, European institutions, to increase their power. The message is very simple. In the course of time, you will have more power. So if in the course of time you will have more power, why not start grabbing this power now? Why not going beyond the treaties? Every article, sooner or later will be changed to your advantage. Why should you bother with all the limitations? They are just provisional and they are temporary. And therefore, all the non-democratic institutions and procedures are welcome. So violating the law, sidestepping the law, breaking the limitations that exist in the legal system, or in the European constitutional system, if you wish, is right in the heart of the European Union. It's not a temporary aberration, right? It's there, right? It's in the core of the entire construction. A few words, perhaps, about a right to veto. You will be hearing more about it shortly. But I want to make a very simple point, namely that the slow abolition of the member states' right to veto does not create a non-national state of equality. On the contrary, it creates a hierarchic structure. The European institutions, being not democratic, do not have a sovereign power. They do not have the sovereign power because they are not legitimized by the real sovereign, that is, by the demos. The only power they have is the power given to them by the big guys, right? By the strongest players in the European politics. Therefore, the centralization that has been underway for quite some time does not really result in the creation of a European nation having a European state. It increases the power of the big players and diminishes the power of weaker member states. So the European institutions will become stronger because they will be provided with the competences by the big players, right? By the big guys, and at the same time, the centralization process deprives the smaller or the weaker member states of the sovereignty. The right to veto was the only, or perhaps the most important tool that the smaller and weaker member states had to defend themselves against the arbitrary power of the big structures of the strongest players. You must be aware. I mean, it's a very, very simple thought, but we have to be aware of it. I mean, if you think of the European Union as an organization in which there's supposed to be equality between Germany on the one hand and, shall I say, Cyprus, with all due respect to Cyprus, there is no way you can make those two countries politically equal, politically or otherwise. There is no way you can do it. So the only or the most important weapon that the small country had was the right to veto. With that being scrapped, the smaller and the weaker countries are at the mercy of the bigger players, the biggest players, and the strongest players, and the European institutions. Therefore, the end result is, of course, a hierarchy or an oligarchy, not some kind of federalism in the proper sense of the word. And this is, I think, it will be the last point I want to make. This shows itself very clearly in the relations between Western Europe and Eastern Europe, or Eastern Central Europe. 2004, big enlargements, and smaller, weaker countries joined the European Union. And most of the leaders of the countries, they thought that they were being kind of upgraded and will become as important as France, right, or Germany, or any of the West European countries. In fact, it was the reverse. They became junior partners, and they were treated as junior partners. Just recently at the conference in Warsaw, Jacek Saryusz-Wolski made an interesting point about a sort of neocolonialism or neocolonialism, internal neocolonialism that has emerged right within the EU, with the old colonialism being no longer possible. Then a segment of the European territory became a sort of new type of colony. That's an interesting point, and I think quite accurate. Okay, I stop at that.
Thank you so much. First, if you allow for the needs of this debate, I'll change the topic which you raised. I would say ever closer union, mapping the EU's superstate fantasies, and not federal fantasies. First, we are facing two contradicting visions of Europe, which are being now confronted to the highest degree because the proposal is on the table. And it is the proposal of a superstate, not a federation. And it is a Schumann's Europe versus Spinelli's Europe, to put it brief. And I have to refer to what said and what started Professor Legutko, referring to this eternal ever closer union formula. I agree, and at the same time modify this approach, saying that ever closer union in the treaties is, and this is a quote, an ever closer union among the peoples of Europe, not between the member states. And it's fundamentally different, and this is being abused by those who call themselves federalists, which are in fact centralizers. And the preamble, and also Article 1, says, creating ever closer union among the peoples of Europe, in which decisions are taken as closely as possible to the citizen in accordance with the principle of subsidiarity. And the same is said in the Article 1, which was already quoted by Professor Legutko, so I will not repeat it. Therefore, ever closer union should be read in the concept with the principles of subsidiarity and proportionality and proximity, Article 10, which means, to paraphrase the motto of the Constitutional Treaty, decentralize in diversity, as close to the citizens, and far away from this concept of engineered interstate, superstate creation process, which is being done so far by abusing treaties and creeping competence creep, and now by this central superstate proposal, which is on the table, in the works of which I did until the last moment when he participated in this Hofstad group, and then in process I left. So it is ever closer union. It is not superstate. Ever closer union is the natural process, incremental, of peoples down in the social societal strata coming closer by cultural bringing together and interchange, mobility, and so forth. But decisions as low as possible, which means decentralized and not centralized. So my reading of the ever closer union principle in the treaty is exactly the opposite of superstate. It's not superstate, it's citizens' close union and not a superstate construct. Now let me debunk for myths, for as you call fantasies, about this superstate proposal. First, I started by saying it's centralist, not federal. It's anti-federalist. Federal structures, if you go to the theory, starting with Proudhon, and if you go to the reality, which is the German federal state, Swiss federal state, and American federal states, the component parts of federation are equal or nearly equal. When I say to Americans, look, we are creating United States of Europe, where New York, Texas, and California will be governing other states, and other states will have nothing to say, they laugh. This is the project. So it is anti-federal, centralist project of building a European state, abolishing the union of sovereign states as it is, at least theoretically, in the treaties, and replacing it with a European superstate, which historically the closest reference would be the Second Reich, Bismarck, 1871, when all small parts of Germany were united, but Prussia ruled. This is the concept which is served and proposed. Already today in those treaties, as rightly stipulated by Professor Legutko, the non-federalist principle we started, it needs the departure from this principle. The double majority voting system, it creates a situation, and the bigger you are in terms of population, the more you weigh. According to population, if you take the four biggest countries, they could overrule 57%. They could, Germany, France, Italy, and Spain, they could overrule all other 23 member states. So it is already far away from. So it is not true that it is a project of federal nature, that it is to, as some say, including von der Leyen, the United States of Europe. The second myth I want to debunk is brings more democracy. It does not, in two ways. First, it moves competences, and this move in 10 areas, I won't repeat, up leaves little, if anything, on the member states level. It moves the sovereignty from the nation state to this superstate, European superstate. So it moves the decisions from the level where democracy functions, better or worse, but still does, to the level where it does not. I mean, there are kilometers of literature in the libraries about the democratic deficit in the EU. And we, in the European Parliament, we know the best how uncontrollable, not accountable executive is, and how little citizens' influence have. Whoever you vote in European elections, you always get the same executive. FAP, socialists, eventually liberals, full stop, in the same commission. And we'll have to digest again Mrs. von Leyen. Whoever you vote, you get the same result. Is it a democracy when you vote and you have no chance to change? No, it is not. Far away, at least. So it is a non-democratic project, moving decision-making from the level where democracy works to the level where democracy does not work. And second, it is done in a very non-democratic way, behind the backs of the people, in societal and media vacuum, hidden. Nowhere, at least in the Western Europe, you will find any debate or media coverage of it. They have changed French constitution to avoid referendum, Article 52 of the French constitution. Nowhere except for Ireland would be a referendum. And you know how Ireland was forced to the second referendum on the Lisbon Treaty. So you vote as long as it pleases, until you please Brussels. So it is not democratic in two ways, because it gives power where democracy does not function properly, and you do it without the consent of the peoples. It is, and citizens, it is fundamentally undemocratic in this second way also. The third myth, it brings more freedom. There are so many, and I won't go into detail, ideological and political nature changes in the treaties as proposed, which invade our value systems and axiologies. We are different. It's about gender, it's about how you live, it's about political correctness, everything which is vaguely embodied in Article 2. This expansion of interpretation, over-interpretation, abuse of Article 2, which is just declarative and not prescriptive, with all the consequences of the practice of Article 7, that it creates a situation where there's less freedom, less liberty, and gives power to those who want to abolish and attack traditional values by social engineering. And the fourth myth, everybody from this centralist superstate perspective says we need it for enlargement. First, after going through in detail all this scientific academic literature, some dozen of articles and books, everywhere they say all the enlargements since EU of 6, 9, 12, and so forth, accelerated and facilitated the decision-making process. It is empirically proven. So it is a total fake. The scientists go even further. They say, if you enlarge, you should decentralize. Because then you would be able to, and here, sorry, I will quote Jean-Claude Juncker, to be big on big things and to not run the small things. Contrary to this centralizing tsunami, in fact, which we are so empirical scientific data contradicts this call, and we'll be voting in the parliament the Andriessen what's his name, the report by no Lithuanian yes say and not taking into account that facts and scientifically proven truth. So enlargement necessitates decentralization, I would say. So just the contrary of what is being said. And the ultimate proof that this is done in bad faith, in a most hypocritical way, is that among 34 cases of liquidation of veto rights, there is no liquidation of veto right and enlargement. And they don't want enlargement. They want centralized superstate, and later on they will say to Ukraine, sorry. It is a pretext, it is hypocrisy, it is untrue. So these are the four myths which I wanted to abolish, and let me close by saying, what should we do in this situation? First, we should realize that what we are witnessing is not a reform of the treaties, as we went through Amsterdam, Maastricht, Nice, Lisbon, Constitutional, and so forth. We are facing a coup d'etat constitutionnel. It is an attempt to liquidate the European Union as we know, a union of sovereign states where, based on the principle of deferral, states, according to Article 5, delegate competences to the Union but remain sovereign, because Article 48 reads that you can change the treaties by increasing or decreasing. Did you ever hear about decreasing competences of the EU level state? No, as a president, in one-way street. But we add, it's blind add, yes.
Blind early.
Yeah, Sedan Street. So it is a fundamental existential challenge and change. It is not one of series of treaty changes. and done behind the back of the people. So we should defend EU as it is, as imperfect as it is, against this abduction. Europe is being hijacked like Zeus hijacked, abducted Europa once in Greek mythology. The time maybe will come where we will talk, if we stop this fully, to repatriate some competences which went too far, which is not by competence creep in agreement with what people want. So fight and defend EU and treaties against abduction. Second, restore subsidiarity, proportionality, and proximity principles enshrined in Article 4, 5, and 10. And go back from what has happened in last years. Commission is no longer a colonel. It's a diktat. EU is no longer a peaceful organization working to reach consensus. If you read the documents which last 10 years, what is the word you meet most frequently? Enforcing. EU has become not a community building organism, it has become an enforcer. Second, by doing things which are forbidden by the treaties, like blocking funds, like punishing, it has become punitive enforcer. What does it mean? Superstate, enforcer, punitive, it's an empire. They're building an empire. And the political mega plan behind is to build Europe from Lisbon to Vladivostok, with Russia as it is, whoever governs, and run by a tandem or by a directoire or by a concert of powers, with neglect of the wishes and will of the people, and with neglect of the wishes and will of most of nations there. But nations are the founding fathers of the treaties, not Ventotene, the manifesto, communists, by the way. There's a lot in this project, and we feel it, we from Central Eastern Europe, we feel it by our skin. It is a communist inspiration project. We didn't rejoin Europe, to fall back into the communist project. Thank you.
Yeah, Madam Moderator, thank you. Madam Moderator, allow me to keep my first written text.
Of course.
And in return, I'll guarantee you I will not exceed the 10 minutes that you allow me. Contrary to what would have been wise and necessary, Brexit was not a moment of introspection for the European Union, a moment for strategic self-reflection about the future developments. On the contrary, since the withdrawal of the United Kingdom, the cooperation of the European member states within the European Union has paradoxically turned into a speed race, a frenzied acceleration of centralization, and the creation, replacing the member states, of a unitary state, or even, in the words of the Flemish-Belgian Guy Verhofstadt, a world empire, literally. Ever since, the European Union is seizing every crisis, including the COVID crisis and the war in Ukraine, to gradually strengthen and accelerate this evolution. The Conference on the Future of Europe was a glorified theatrical performance of commedia dell'arte, and in fact a major failure. Just a few hundred citizens showed up for the conference and were subsequently manipulated by professionals during the meetings and steered towards a list of proposals that are virtually a copy of the most far-reaching unifying projects of the unitary state. The conference then gave the left liberal and green majority of the European Parliament the opportunity to promote these proposals as the only and irreversible path for cooperation on the European continent.
This majority has been calling itself the pro-European majority. Anyone who disagrees with it belongs to the, quote, anti-European minority, or in short, to the, quote, extreme rights, or the, quote, populist, or the, quote, authoritarian, or in the worst case, the, quote, pro-Russian part of the European Parliament. We, ID Group, reject these accusations, of course, and remain solely committed to free and negotiated European cooperation in which member states and peoples are not deprived of their rights. European standards cannot be imposed on citizens whose member state has not agreed to them. The emphasis must be on the return of power to the member states. An amendment to the treaties is therefore only useful to us if this possibility is provided for. We want to contribute to Europe, but Europe must change for the better and not become worse than it already is. Hence, we are now confronted, following the fake conference, with formal parliamentary initiatives like the report on the reform of the treaties, for which the pen was held by, again, Guy Verhofstadt, and which was voted last November, only approved by a slim majority, remember that, but containing a list of absurd wishes anyway. In this report, the following was suggested. 1, overcoming unanimity, voting in the Council in many of the areas for which it is still foreseen in favor of switching to qualified majorities, already mentioned. 2, attributing new powers to the European Parliament, including the right of initiative, deciding on its own composition, and a shift to the ordinary legislative procedure for almost all subjects. 3, attributing new shared and exclusive competences to the EU, in particular for environment and biodiversity, fortunately rejected by the majority. 4, creating the European defense with an EU Minister for Foreign Affairs. 5, reforming the decision-making process through the creation of a bicameral Council-Parliament system, where the Council will be abolished as an advisory committee like the Senate in most federal countries. 6, new structure, reduction in number and new powers for the Commission, which should become the full-fledged executive, with its president even being called President of the European Union, a reform process that would be coupled with the Spitzenkandidat procedure. All this, the fake conference, the Verhofstadt reform plans, the call for a convention was designed to promote a predetermined agenda and has been used as a smokescreen to force through fundamental policy changes, including abolishing the Council and to create a further enlargement of the EU. We oppose the call for a convention with the only goal to implement an ever closer union in their sense of the word, and finally, an EU superstate. We consider this proposal as a failed attempt to meet the demand for necessary and thorough reform of the EU functioning. The past procedure for treaty changes have been used to push through a European constitution. This was only prevented through the referenda outcome in certain member states. Therefore, once again, we demand that national referenda in the member states are held so that citizens can vote on the possibility of a modification of the treaties. This would give a real democratic legitimacy to such a proposal, unlike the conclusions of the fake conference based on a small number of selected citizens and a theater. Remember that initially, 13 member states have expressed their opposition to a modification of the treaties. This is a good thing. We call for a more democratic and transparent European Union, where a significant number of competences would be handed back to the member states, which would remain fully sovereign with extended veto rights. What we should do is negotiate from scratch on Council level and in accordance with the wishes of each and every member state, a new treaty that reinstalls the long-forgotten subsidiarity principle, certainly with opt-out clauses and a repartition of competences to the member states. This will facilitate a better and more suitable decision-making process closer to the citizens than the totally integrated and severely centralized EU state that the federalist lobby in the Parliament has in mind. Fortunately, more and more partners are finding each other, regardless of group boundaries, to reverse this evolution. A reformed EU is not synonymous with more European Union, but with an EU that is retreating. The center of gravity of policy and democracy must remain close to the citizens and therefore at the level of the member states and their nation states. Apart from apologizing, of course, in front of you for the character of Guy Verhofstadt. Like me, a Flemish Belgian, who is nowadays speaking not on behalf of the Flemings, but merely only on behalf of himself. We, the patriotic forces in the European Parliament, the forces of homeland and freedom, should join forces. I would call upon that today, and we should stand strong, because no matter how strong our opponents are, and they are very strong, we will be stronger because we have the strength of our conviction, and we incarnate the hope that the people of Europe have put in us. Long live Europe of nations, and long live the Europe of freedom. Thank you.
Thank you to all three of you. I couldn't have choreographed your talks better than you did yourselves. So thank you for that. I see we have about 10 minutes for discussion. So I will cede my moderator's privilege and offer the floor to this wonderful group. I'm sure there are questions or comments you might want to give. Please. Please speak up so that our viewers at home can hear you as well.
I'll try my best. My name is Gunnar Beck. I'm an MEP. My thanks to all three. There's very little. All three colleagues of mine who've given excellent papers. There's practically nothing I can disagree with. Two remarks. First, I agree that the EU treaties are replete with contradictions. It's a bit like Rousseau, man has to be reborn before he dies, that sort of thing. There's no way of squaring the things. They do, of course, serve a distinct purpose, all these contradictions. Namely, more and more these matters are being adjudicated by the European Court of Justice in the face of normative uncertainty and many contradictions. The court can do what it likes, will probably do what it likes anyway, but it's easier if there's textual evidence for what it does. So even the slightest reference occurs to European Union, and even if it can be juxtaposed against 10 specific statements which were specially used competence, can be used to justify basically every integrationist move. Now, my second remark concerns, well, I basically agree. I mean, I didn't take much issue with the sort of implicit or part with the argument that Germany is now dominating, except perhaps I'd like to add that Germany is, of course, not dominating in her own interest. Germany is today is nothing other than the fifth horseman of the apocalypse. It is just a vehicle for imposing all the things you've mentioned. It's the sort of chief vehicle for the oligarchy, but of course ordinary Germans are just as much a victim of this as all the other peoples of the European Union. Now, I'm not saying that anyone suggested anything different from that, but I think it could perhaps be a useful clarification. Germany is implementing the globalist or oligarchical interest. It's simply the principal European agent for that. It is not really a country that is pursuing anything approaching conventional national interests.
Thank you very much. Other comments or questions for our panel?
Gigatur from Slovenia. I just have an example, actually, is a very funny way of expanding competences, and MEPs have been voting on that way. It's the artificial intelligence. The EU chose to regulate artificial intelligence in general, and that will apply women are better. So artificial intelligence is used in areas which still are national competencies, like education, like security, etc. But it's a very nice example of the overreach. You regulate something and you diminish what you can do on the national competencies. It's a dangerous way. You will also force European Union to lack citing that's the right,
Thank you for that. Please. You could do Romanian and you can keep us. Thank you very much for your comments and for sharing your thoughts with you. Mr. Random, as you mentioned, you were very much in favor of speaking up in favor of more unity among the right inside the European Parliament. I think that's the way forward. I would like to ask the opinion of our question from there. What are the major obstacles on Europe and we'll have to do? Because we are getting very close to the elections and we desperately need our voice to be stronger in the fight. And for that, it's right that we are here serving.
So, the direction.
Well, a part of the problem, of course, is national politics. If you have two center right or right-wing parties in one nation and they do not exactly see eye to eye, so they're not very likely to admit the conservative brothers or cousins in the same group. And so there's one problem. Another problem is that is the right side of the spectrum, we've allowed the bad guys to blackmail us that you cannot be associated with this party or with that party or with this politician because this party is a far right or fascist or whatever, and you're afraid that you will be surrounded by a cordon sanitaire, right? I mean, the left, they do not have any objections of being together with the communists. The EPP does not have the slightest objection of being in a coalition with the communists, whereas we, the other side of the spectrum, somehow turn out to be weak on that point, and some of our parties still are very much afraid of being mentioned together in one breath with another party that has a bad reputation.
Thank you. I think that's a perfect place to wrap up by saying these questions, these treaty change proposals are the most urgent because once it's done, it can't be undone, or certainly with great difficulty, because, of course, one of the things that wasn't mentioned is a proposal to make future treaty changes pass with a 4/5 majority. So, of course, this is the last chance for a unanimous decision. Am I incorrect on that?
Well, I don't want to correct you, but on the other hand, I want to relativize the panic that your words could arouse. I was in AFCO with my colleagues also. We lived after the Brexit paradox that I mentioned. We lived a period in which there was first a report of Mr. Verhofstadt, again, sorry for him, Verhofstadt, that designing what we can already do within the actual Lisbon Treaty. And then a few months later, there was a report of Bresso and Brok, Mercedes Bresso and Elmar Brok. They together, a German and an Italian, but socialists and EPP, they wrote a report. Please read that again in the former term. a report on what we can already do with beyond the Lisbon Treaty. And so they designed within the Lisbon Treaty, we can do, Verhofstadt, of course, he was designing what we discussed here today, but they put a European Union on paper in their report without having to change the Lisbon Treaty. And I was astonished seeing what they already could do, in their mind, could do within the Lisbon Treaty. So these treaty changes, of course, they are important. Of course, if we could prevent them, we should. But please keep in mind, the opponents don't need the treaties. They don't respect the treaties, and if necessary, they'll tell you that they are within the treaties. And so, in this sense, I would relativize a bit the panic.
Your point is well taken. I think one thing we can all agree on is that, in fact, all of this process is hidden. The discussions about it are hidden, if they're being discussed at all. Certainly, this is one of the reasons why the European conservative is in Brussels. Why did we open an office in Brussels? So we could have conversations like this, so that we could publish opinion, essays, analyses, and news reports about what's happening in Europe, so that ordinary European citizens, many of whom are in this room and many of whom I hope will be watching on our YouTube channel, so that they understand what's at stake. Certainly, we can say that the best disinfectant is sunlight. So let's shine some light into the shady corners of what's happening here in Brussels. I thank you all very much for coming. I thank you very much to my distinguished panel, and to viewers at home. Thanks for joining us.